I never thought I would stand here confessing this to you. But something happened last night. Something I can't erase from my mind. It has made me question everything I once believed about love, family, and myself. I've always tried to be a good person, a good wife, a good mother. But sometimes life doesn't go as planned. Sometimes you find yourself in a place you never imagined. A place where the lines between right and wrong blur. Where the heart overpowers the mind. Last night I crossed a line. A line I never thought I would. And now all I can do is stand here, staring at the shattered pieces of my life, wondering how I can put them back together. This is not just a story about betrayal. It is a story about loneliness, about longing, about the choices we make when we feel we have nothing left to lose. It is a story about the moments that change our lives forever. I am Angela and this is my story. Before I continue, I need to warn you that this story contains mature themes. It talks about family, love, and the mistakes we make when we lose our way. If these topics make you uncomfortable, then perhaps this isn't the story for you. But if you are willing to listen, willing to understand the complexities of life and love, then stay with me. Because this is not just my story. It is a story about what happens when we lose ourselves and what it takes to find our way back. Let me take you back to the moment when it all began, the night that changed everything. Let me tell you about myself. My name is Angela. I am 40 years old. From the outside, my life appears normal, stable, even happy. But inside, I have been falling apart for a long time. I have been married to Frank for 15 years. He is a good man, hardworking, reliable. But somewhere along this journey, we stopped being partners. We became roommates, two people living in the same house, sleeping in the same bed, sharing a life but not truly sharing anything at all. Frank is always busy. He is a project manager, and his work consumes him. Late nights at the office, early mornings buried in calls, weekends filled with endless emails. I understand that he is working to provide for our family, but sometimes I just wish he would see me, really see me. I tried talking to him, expressing my loneliness, telling him how much I miss the way we used to be. But he just brushed it off. "Angela, you're overthinking," he said. "We're fine. We're happy." But we weren't fine. And I wasn't happy. I am also a mother. My eldest son, Jeam, 20, is from my previous relationship. Then there's Ellie, 12, and Tom, 9. They are my whole world. But even in motherhood, I cannot fill the emptiness inside me. I have always been the kind of person who needs real connection. Not just shallow conversations about schedules and household chores. I want to be seen, to be heard, to be loved. But lately I feel like no one sees me anymore. Not Frank, not even my own children. I have always struggled with insecurity, perhaps since childhood. My parents were distant. They loved me, but not in a way that was visible. I grew up with a heart longing for affection, and that has never changed. Frank used to give me that. When we first fell in love, he was everything I needed. Someone who made me feel special, wanted. But over the years things changed. The little things like hugs, compliments, late-night conversations, they all disappeared. I tried filling that void with motherhood, with keeping the house perfect, with being the wife Frank wanted. But it was never enough, not for him and not for me. I had thought about leaving, starting over. But how could I? The kids needed me. And deep down I still loved Frank. I just wished he loved me the way he used to. So I stayed. I smiled. I pretended everything was okay. But inside I was breaking. And then there was my son Jeam, my firstborn. He was always different from other kids. More sensitive, more perceptive. He saw things others didn't. Lately, he has been the only one who seems to notice how I've been feeling. He and I have always been close. Perhaps too close. He has been my confidant, my shoulder to lean on. But I never thought that. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the night it all began. The night I lost myself. Jackson was silent for a long time. I could hear the ticking of the clock in the background. And the longer he stayed quiet, the worse I felt. Finally, he leaned back, rubbing his face with his hands. "You have to stop." His voice was low and firm. "Cut her off completely." "It's not that simple." My voice came out sharp, defensive. But Jackson didn't budge. "Yes, it is." He leaned forward, locking eyes with me. "Thomas, listen to me. This won't end well. You know that." I nodded, but it didn't feel real. How was I supposed to pretend like this never happened? And what about Nia? What am I supposed to tell her? Jackson didn't hesitate. Nothing. I froze. You're saying I should lie to her? I'm saying you already did. His words hit harder than I expected. You lied the second you let this happen. And if you tell her now, it's over. You know that, right? I dropped my head into my hands. He was right. Telling her wouldn't fix anything. It would only blow everything up. But what about Sam? I asked quietly. Jackson exhaled like he had been holding his breath. You block her. You don't answer her texts. You shut it down before it gets worse. But it was already worse. And I hadn't even told him the whole truth about the way Sam still looked at me, about the messages she had sent earlier that day, the ones I couldn't bring myself to delete, the pictures, the words. I knew I should block her, but I couldn't. Every time my phone buzzed, part of me hoped it was her. And that scared me more than anything else. Are you even listening to me? Jackson stared at me, his eyes hard. If you don't stop this now, you're going to lose everything. His words hung in the air long after he left. But even as I sat there staring at my phone, I wasn't sure if I had it in me to listen. I sat there for hours staring at the screen. Her name was still at the top of my messages. I scrolled through the conversation one last time. The pictures. The words. The reminders of what I had done. I took a deep breath and hit delete. It was like ripping off a bandage that had been stuck for too long. But it wasn't enough. Not even close. I opened my settings, blocked her number, stared at the screen until it went dark. I wanted to feel relieved, like I had done the right thing, like I had finally ended it. But all I felt was emptiness. There are moments in life that we cannot foresee, moments that make us look back at ourselves and question everything we once believed. That night I experienced such a moment. Jeam has always been easy to talk to, always knowing how to make you feel like the only person in the world. That night, he also opened up to me about his own worries. I feel lost, Jeam sighed, running his fingers through his hair. I don't know where I belong, work, family, everything feels so unclear. I reached out and gently held his hand. I understand, I said softly. I feel the same way. He looked at me, really looked at me. And in his eyes I saw empathy, an understanding I hadn't found in Frank for a long time. You've always been strong, Mom, Jeam said in his deep voice. But you don't have to be. At least not in front of me. His words broke me. For years I had been holding everything in, never daring to show my weakness. We talked through the night about life, about things neither of us had ever dared to confess to anyone else. For the first time in a long while I didn't feel alone. But alongside that relief, I also sensed something changing between us. Something I was afraid to name. Then on a Friday evening I went out with a few friends, Lisa and some colleagues. We had a few drinks, laughed about old memories, and for a moment I felt like myself again. Not just a wife, not just a mother, I was Angela again. But when I returned home, silence engulfed the house. Frank was still at the office and the kids were fast asleep. And that emptiness crept back in, stronger than ever. I texted Jeam. Are you still up? I need someone to talk to. He responded immediately. I'll be there in 20 minutes. When Jeam arrived, I was still sitting on the sofa, still in my dress from the night out, a glass of wine in my hand. He looked at me with concern. Are you okay, Mom? I shrugged. It's just one of those nights. He sat down beside me, and I poured him a glass. We talked about his work, about my evening, about everything and nothing in particular. The wine made me loosen up, made me say things I never thought I would. I feel so lonely, I whispered, staring into my glass. Frank is always busy, the kids are growing up so fast. Sometimes I don't even recognize myself anymore. Jeam didn't reply immediately, just quietly listened. And then in a very soft voice he said, I understand. Sometimes I feel the same way. There was something in his voice, a raw honesty, a vulnerability I wasn't used to hearing from my son. It made me see Jeam in a different light. Not just as my child, but as someone who truly understood me. The atmosphere shifted. At first it was subtle, a lingering gaze, an accidental touch. But then it wasn't so subtle anymore. I don't know what possessed me at that moment. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was the loneliness. Maybe it was the way Jeam looked at me, as if I were the only person in the world. But before I could stop myself, I said something I never thought I would. Jeam, can I share something with you? I said softly, my voice trembling. He hesitated, his eyes torn between hesitation and curiosity. But then slowly he nodded. I reached out, lightly touching his face, feeling my fingers tremble. You're the only one who understands me, I whispered. The only one who truly sees me. Jeam didn't pull away. He didn't say no. And that was all that mattered. What happened next? I can't put into words. Not because I don't remember, but because it's too difficult, too painful to recount. All I can say is that, in that moment, I wasn't thinking about Frank, about the kids, or about the consequences. I was simply lost. When it was over, we sat in silence. Jeam looked at me, his eyes filled with emotions I couldn't define. Regret, confusion, fear. Mom, he began, but I cut him off. Don't, I said, my voice shaking. Don't say anything. He left soon after. And I just sat there, staring at the empty glass in my hands, my heart pounding, my mind blank. And the only thought running through my head was, what have I done? But even as guilt consumed me, another feeling crept in. A feeling I dared not acknowledge. Relief. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. And that scared me more than anything else. We can't go on like this. Jeam's voice was gentle, but each word cut into my heart like a knife. I knew he was right. Of course he was right. But hearing him say it made everything too real. I know, I whispered, my voice trembling. I'm sorry, Jeam. I never wanted this. But I couldn't finish that sentence. There were no words to explain what had happened. No way to make things right. Jeam looked at me, his eyes filled with both sadness and disappointment. You know I love you, don't you? He said softly. But this isn't right. It's not good for either of us. Tears streamed down my face. I nodded, swallowing my pain. I know. But I don't know how to fix it. He didn't have an answer either. Neither of us did. From that day on, our relationship changed. The closeness we once had was replaced by an awkward distance. We still talked, but everything felt forced, polite. That distance broke my heart, but I knew it was necessary. At home, things weren't any better. Frank started noticing changes in me. I wasn't sleeping well. I became quieter. He asked me if I was okay, and I just nodded, pretending everything was fine. But I wasn't fine. The secret unravels. One evening, Frank came home earlier than usual, a rare occurrence, and found me sitting alone on the couch, staring blankly into space. He sat down beside me, his eyes full of concern. Angela, he said gently, what's going on? You've changed so much. I wanted to tell him, to confess everything and beg for forgiveness. But I couldn't. The words wouldn't come out. I just shook my head. I'm just tired. Frank didn't push me. He just nodded and wrapped his arms around me. If you ever need to talk, I'm here. His kindness only made me feel worse. He was trying while I was holding on to a secret I couldn't bear to say out loud. He was struggling with his emotions too. He spent more time out of the house, avoiding me whenever he could. And when I finally tried to talk to him, he just shook his head. We don't need to talk about it, Mom. But I knew silence was never the solution. The moment of no return. Everything collapsed on a night I will never forget. Jeam came over, perhaps to talk. Or maybe because we both felt the pull of something dangerous between us, something neither of us could sever. We sat in the living room, not touching, but the tension was palpable. And then the door opened. Frank stood there, frozen. His keys were still in his hand, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Jeam. And I saw the exact moment when everything shattered inside him. What the hell is going on here? He demanded, his voice laced with both anger and pain. I couldn't say a word. Jeam was the first to react. He shot up from his seat, his face pale. It's not what you think, Dad, he said, his voice unsteady. But it was too late. Frank wasn't listening anymore. He took a step forward, his fists clenched. Get out of my house. Jeam didn't argue. He just turned and left, leaving me alone with Frank. How long? His voice was low, but I could feel the rage simmering underneath. I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. It's not what you think, Frank. How long, Angela? He shouted, his voice echoing through the house. I gasped. Just once. The words caught in my throat. Frank looked at me, his eyes filled with betrayal. Once was already too much. He didn't say another word. He just walked out of the room. A moment later I heard the front door slam shut. He didn't come home that night. Or the next night. When he finally returned, it was only to pack his things. "I'll be staying at a friend's place for a while," he said coldly. "I need time to think." I didn't stop him. I had no right to. Jeam didn't come back either. He avoided me, ignoring my texts and calls. And then my other children started to sense something was wrong. Finley, my 12-year-old daughter, started acting out. "What did you do to make Dad leave?" she screamed, tears streaming down her face. I had no answer. And Brody, my 9-year-old son, grew quieter than ever. He no longer laughed. He no longer talked. He just withdrew. And I completely broke down. The first step toward redemption. I knew I couldn't keep living like this. So I sought out a therapist. Sitting down, facing myself, confronting my mistakes. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. But it was necessary. I wrote a letter to Jeam. I didn't beg for forgiveness. I just wanted him to know that I loved him. Not as anything else, but as his mother. I wanted him to know I was wrong. I didn't know if he would read it. I didn't know if he would ever forgive me. But I needed to say it. And Frank, he hasn't forgiven me yet. But he's willing to try. And for me, that is a start. He wrote back to me. Just a few short lines, but to me they meant everything. "Mom, I love you. But I need time." I understood that. And I would give Jeam all the time he needed. This is not a happy ending. Not at all. There is still too much pain, too many wounds that need healing. But this is a beginning. A chance to rebuild. To grow. To learn from mistakes. I don't know what the future holds. But I know one thing. I will not stop trying for myself, for my family, for the people I love. And maybe, just maybe, that is enough. I am not proud of what I have done. But I have learned that love is not always clear. Not always absolutely right or wrong. Sometimes it is messy. Sometimes it is painful. Sometimes it is full of mistakes. But most importantly, love is also about forgiveness. It is about growth. It is about having the strength to move forward. This journey has taught me that we are all human. We all make choices we regret. We all carry burdens we wish we could put down. But the beauty of life is that we can learn from those mistakes. We can grow. We can heal. If you have ever gone through something similar, or if you are struggling with your own choices, know that you are not alone. It is never too late to seek help, to make amends, to start over. Thank you for listening to my story. It was not easy to share this, but I hope it makes you think about love, about family, about forgiveness. They are never simple, but they are always worth fighting for. If this story resonates with you, leave a comment below and share your thoughts. I would love to hear from you. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and like to follow more stories about love, relationships, and the beautifully complex journey of being human. Thank you for being here. It means more than you can imagine.